this is shit, this is bad money, look towards Bitcoin maybe. What Bitcoin has done is just really enlightened my understanding of how the world actually operates and the way it works and what fiat money is and what the global reserve currency means and IMF and the WEF. Bitcoin is hope. Bitcoin is an opportunity for us to really take back control of our own autonomy.
We all come back to that one thing that's called freedom and hope and the prosperity of a new world.
I was at the Fiat Mine today, and it's days like today that I think, do you know what? I wish I was full-time in Bitcoin, but maybe that's just a dream. But we're on a mission, aren't we, Robin? Because obviously we're creating things like podcasts to get the signal of Bitcoin out there. So hopefully we're doing ourselves a favor by, presenting ourselves and our personalities out there into the space. So, yeah.
This is definitely a really cool. So, are you planning to do it full time? Like, is there like a plan to do it at some point, only like Bitcoin stuff, or even like maybe working in a Bitcoin company and still having a fiat pay or something like that?
I'm open to possibilities, right? And I think I have all my life. I think, throughout my life, I was sort of keeping my eye on the horizon, right, to see what opportunities come up. And so, yeah, I'm always been one of those sort of rolling stones, if you like, of sort of thinking about what else could I do? What else can I learn? How else can I better myself and things like that? Sometimes motivated by wealth, right? Or what is it I can do to get paid more to sort of actually, for a change, have some disposable income rather than just trying to pay the bills, keep my head above water. What else is it can I do? At one stage, I was when I was working a long time ago now in the police, and we can discuss that if you want, but I was a police officer for 17 years. And even then, I was struggling to pay the mortgage, the bills and all that sort of stuff. And I even enrolled onto a night college. I was doing 3 evenings a week in some college in the town that I once lived in, studying to become a qualified electrician.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me 3 years to get that qualification, going 3 evenings a week at this college to do that, all with the mindset that once I'm qualified, maybe I can do an additional job in between my shifts on my day off as an additional income to help sort of, plug in a little bit of income that I can be a little bit more comfortable. But all I was doing was just running faster on this hamster's wheel, right, of trying to obtain something that was essentially unobtainable, because little did I know, as ignorant as I was until I jumped down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, was this thing called inflation, right? And you're forever just chasing this unobtainable goal. And even if you get there, you still have to work in order to sustain it. So yeah, that's me going off on a bit of a rant of my life. But I think that's where a lot of people get sort of stuck, is in this kind of pursuit towards something that is very difficult to get to.
Yeah, it's like a moving target. Like if you are chasing after dollars or after fiat money in general, it's definitely a moving target, because 1 million now is not that what it was 20 years ago, and it will definitely be different in 20 years from now. So it's like if you're shooting for that 1 million, yeah, it's getting easier, but the
Yeah,
1 million is not what it was.
100%. And I don't know if you saw it. I put a tweet out the other day, and it was something along the lines of, when Bitcoin gets to 1 million, how much will 1 million actually be worth?
Yeah.
And it was like, when we get there, what actually would it be able to buy in real life, right? And the people's responses are as weird as wonderful as you might expect on X. But also, like, I was rewatching Breaking Bad recently, and I came across the episode when, was it Skyler, his wife, sort of showed him the warehouse where he had $8 million, I think it was, or was it 80 million? I can't remember. He had like millions of dollars stacked up in paper money in this warehouse. And she was saying something like, oh, this is enough for 10 lifetimes. But really, if you factor in inflation, like Breaking Bad was 2010, right? And now we're 24. So if you factor in the amount of inflation we've had since then, he would have eroded 40% of his purchasing power already. So if he kept it there for another 14 years, that will buy him nothing,
Yeah, and
right?
if
So
he,
he better go out and keep cooking that meth, right? Because it's just going to be worth nothing eventually, right? And I think people don't really understand that, and I think that's the mission that we're trying to get out there as Bitcoiners, right? Is that this is shit, this is bad money. So yeah, look towards Bitcoin maybe.
yeah, I love that you're diving down the rabbit holes. And I always do before I have a guest on, I check if they were on your episode. Like I'm going on YouTube usually and see which podcast they have been on. And I always love to watch yours. And learn more about the guest, because when you go down the rabbit hole, you learn a lot about the person in general. And I usually keep it short, the rabbit hole story, and try to keep like a lot of different questions in my mind. But
Mhm.
going down the rabbit hole changes a lot of people's lives, especially those that are young or have like an inflection point with Bitcoin in their lives. There are some, of course, they understood like Austrian economics before Bitcoin. Austrian economics was there before Bitcoin. And if you're in that mindset and you're good in your life, maybe Bitcoin was really natural for you, and it came natural. But for most people, it changed a lot. And the first question I actually wanted to ask you is, from all those episodes, people are going down the rabbit hole and telling you really cool stories sometimes. What did you learn from those stories from the guests? Like, what is the biggest takeaways of? I think what is it? Over 200 videos I saw on YouTube.
Yeah. So obviously, being the host of Rabbit Hole Stories, me and my co-host Joel, who's also Austrian like yourself, Robin, and we met at a London Bitcoin meetup, and after a few times, we got into discussion about wanting to represent a little bit more about the represent the European voice more, I think, in the space, because obviously you've got a lot of representation over in the States and things like that. And there is it's beautiful to see a growing podcast community forming, yourself being one of them. And you got Bitcoin for Millennials and others popping up as well. So it's nice seeing this kind of natural sort of evolution of different signals getting out there. People like have said to me before, asked the question, are there too many Bitcoin podcasts? And I think, there's been a little bit of that conversation on X and Noster last year as well. And honestly, I don't think that you can ever have too many Bitcoin podcasts, because the fascinating thing I think about, and what one of the things I've learned to answer your question is, everyone's got their own individual personality that they bring into the Bitcoin ecosystem, right? And every Bitcoin podcast that pops up, whether it's the Bitcoin Source over in America, or it's your podcast, or all the others, they've all got their own personalities and their own voice and their own sort of ideas or ideologies about Bitcoin, right? And they're putting that signal out there, and they're resonating with a certain amount of people that I can't resonate with, and me and Joel can't resonate with, right? But obviously, the more people and the more different personalities and the more kind of ideas there are that are forming and putting their voice out there, the more people we're going to actually resonate with. And that ripple effect, hopefully, will just signal in different frequencies to different people. And the idea about Rabbit Hole Stories is, yes, guests come on the show and we say, mate, what's your Bitcoin origin story? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you discover it? And not only that, what impact did it have on you, and what is it you're doing now in this space? So we're trying to figure out, and we're trying to elevate voices for people to hear that might resonate, voices that, so we want to get as many different people on from many different parts of the ecosystem, just to tell us their rabbit hole story. And we go in just like I have with you, Robin. There's no sort of pre-script or sort of pre-discussion about what we're going to talk about. And that's what I love, is the sort of flow of things, right? Because I think then we can only then bring in our personalities, our insights, and have a discussion together, right? And that's what I think is great about what we do, is because something might come up that the person says that will trigger off a question in my head, a curiosity, a question that I thought, oh, do you know what, that would be interesting to know. And I just attached that to my own rabbit hole story, because the whole idea of going down a rabbit hole for me anyway is to question everything, re-evaluate my understanding of the thing I once knew before I went into the rabbit hole, because I've come in with the barnacles of the legacy system and ideas that they've indoctrinated in me in some way. And it's great to have a community with different insights, different ideas, and different understandings of things. And I want to embrace that. I want to sort of like take that on and sort of validate that against my own understanding of things. And I think that's what we should be doing in this space. And I think I've been quite vocal recently about maybe we should just be less shitting on each other and sort of like more sort of engaging in actual debate and discourse rather than just blocking each other, shutting each other down. I know it's the nature of social media, right? But I think we should be careful of falling into these traps of falling into, like, we should actually explore the rabbit hole, and sort of come together as sort of like inquisitive, if you like, in some way. But that's my own mindset of the rabbit hole, and that's how rabbit hole stories is evolving, I think.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing if you are working closer together. And I think also on the note, as you said it, in Europe there's not enough. Like the Americans seem to be like strong on the podcast side. There's more stories on there. I think it's also because there's so many different languages in Europe. In Germany, for example, I think we have a really cool community with Block Trainer. He only
Mm,
produces in German, so people don't even know him when they don't speak German. And I guess there are great podcasts in Spanish that I never heard. There are great podcasts in any other language in the European sphere where I never heard from them. But in America, there's just like one language, so you know all the podcasts there. There's nothing different going on there. So I think sometimes maybe it comes across stronger because they have one language and you hear about them more, and they are really good also in marketing. I think like Americans are really
mm,
good in
mm,
marketing themselves and marketing stuff in general. So I think we have a really strong community in Europe that has to be discovered. And maybe when we have AI real time translation, this will help.
mm.
I saw some scary videos.
Well, one of them being the recent speech by was it the Argentinian president,
Yes, Javier.
Milei? Like, yeah, obviously, like that was translated in English using AI, right? And that was a little bit freaky watching that, because obviously his mouth was moving as if he was speaking English, but he was clearly not. And yeah, but in that same thread and that same point, you're right in the sense that AI. I mean, there's a lot of criticism within the Bitcoin ecosystem about what AI is and the centralization of it and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I get it, and these are all valid points, but I think we should also take on the fact that the advancement in technology, and the fact that we're able to just communicate online live and record this and stuff like that is a way for people to it's a tool essentially, right? And we should use these tools to sort of simplify our lives in some way, but also be conscious of the dangers that can come about as a result of these tools. So yeah, but AI, it could also be a good opportunity for us to sort of communicate across different languages together. So
I
yeah,
always
yeah.
I always remember that one speech. I forgot her name, but there's a German politician that spoke about Bitcoin in the German parliament, and it was translated with an AI tool, and it was all over Twitter for like a week. And I was also reposting it, and people were replying to me. It's like, why are they speaking English in the German parliament? I'm like, they're not. They're not. It's AI.
Yeah, yeah, but
It
it
gets
also
scary.
raises the point really, as well as like there's so much confusing narratives out there. The world is like, I don't know, the information age has brought about obviously the abundance and immediate access to information, but it's also brought about a confusing, head spinning. It's difficult to sift through what is the truth now, what is real, and what narratives are misguided or unilaterally understood, right? It's a difficult thing nowadays to sort of like sift through stuff. So I think we should be, as Bitcoiners, very vigilant about narratives and stuff, and that's part of why I'm questioning Bitcoin, is because I want to now question everything. I want to sort of check it against my own understanding of things, like I said earlier, and it's very easy to fall into a trap, I think, of just seeking out only things that I agree with, because that's the easy thing to do, right? It's easier for me just to sort of confirm my own bias rather than actually go through the difficult and sometimes painful truth of admitting to myself that I might have been wrong. And I think that we should really embrace the fact that we should relearn and actually embrace that as an opportunity for us to see the world through a different lens. And that's the Bitcoin lens, right? And that provides me the incentive to seek out truth in some way. But I'm curious, Robin. I don't know if you experience this, and obviously you're the one questioning me, right? But I don't know whether you've agreed with much about what I've said, and I invite you to come back and tell me if you think in different ways. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I think sometimes we're in danger when we're recording podcasts, is like just agreeing or not actually challenging people. And I think we should do more of that. And rather than going around and just agree, hold a mirror up to them just as much as we should hold a mirror up to ourselves, right? So I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting because I had already like at least 5, 6 guests on where they have raised a point in the middle of the discussion where
Mm,
I disagreed to a really big, like usually with Bitcoiners, I'm agreeing a lot. Like I
yeah.
usually, especially in the beginning, I reached out to people that I already knew. So when you know people and you know what to ask them, control the questioning part,
Mm,
it's there's not usually not a big debate going on there. But there are sometimes the point where I have to decide, do I want to make it a podcast where I explore this discussion, where I want to challenge people, or I think Lex Friedman, the podcast, he always also makes a disclaimer in front of the podcast where he says, um, sometimes the guest says something I disagree with, but I want to explore his opinion. And
mm,
that's why I'm usually not challenging him. Like something along these lines, he says is way better than me. But he's saying basically he's not challenging them at the moment to explore what he is thinking. Because sometimes I also think that when we discuss too much, as you said in the early, when the discussion is like too heated, too much, then we might have the trap of like just proving each other wrong, like just
right,
shitting
right.
on each other. Like there's a balance to it where you have to question the guest, so his thinking comes out and the listener can see for themselves, or do I like this opinion or not. And I
Mm,
usually
mm-hmm.
take the more passive approach, to be honest, to be like, I want to ask them. And there was those few steps along the way. I made a podcast with British Hoddle. If you saw
Mm,
it,
mm,
I disagreed with some points with him. I made recently a podcast with a gold bug that also has Bitcoin. Like he
yeah.
has like a hybrid version, but he still has a little bit more gold than Bitcoin. I disagreed with him a lot, but I wanted to find out why they're thinking like that, what they are going through. The other route is like questioning him a lot and debating him. Like there's a fine balance to find and coming through the truth. But as you said, it's a hard thing to do because um, it's easy to fall in the trap, especially with the feeds. No matter where you are, and it doesn't matter if you're on Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, or wherever. There's always a feed that feeding you stuff which you
Mm,
interact with. If
of
you're not
course.
interacting with stuff, they're not feeding
Yes.
it because it does not keep you on the platform. So the algorithms are designed way that you interact with them. So there's a confirmation bias programmed into those things, and it can lead to a society that is completely asleep and is not questioning themselves, oh, what is this Bitcoin thing actually?
Mm, mm.
Is it actually wasteful for the environment? Is actually like all those FUDs that do you actually question them? Like, and that's an interesting thing because
Yeah, it's true.
uh, that's maybe also one reason, and I don't know if you also see it that way. One reason why so many people are asleep and don't question money.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you make very interesting points. And look, with rabbit hole stories, for example, we rarely challenge people because it's their rabbit hole story. We want to know, how they see the world through this Bitcoin lens, and we don't challenge much in that. We've started to put out episodes that are just me and Joel talking. We put one out recently, and this is then the opportunity for us to give our sort of perspective on things and be a little bit critical and challenging of some of the things that we've seen as well, and sort of inject our sort of mindset into it as well. So we're kind of wanting rabbit hole stories to evolve, if you like, not only just to become people's rabbit hole stories, but then for me and Joel, once we've been on these different journeys, to sort of take all that information in and then sort of like absorb it as and review that and then come out with our own kind of ideas about the sort of narratives in the space and what we think about that. So I think that's what we're trying to focus on. But you make an interesting point about algorithms and things like that, and that's something we certainly should be mindful of. And it's an easy trap to fall into with the stuff that you engage with, because these social media platforms want to keep you on their platforms for as long as possible, right? Because they're in competition with other social networking platforms, right? So the algorithms are designed to keep you engaged. And if you're engaged in constant arguments, but that's what keeps you on there, they're going to make sure that you get fed that kind of stuff. If it's trying to give you what it is that it thinks that you want. And I think we should be mindful of that when we're engaging on X, for example, or anywhere we go, is because, even on YouTube, for example, I might have watched a video and all of a sudden I'm getting sort of other videos that are a similar kind of tone and thread to that. And I'm like, I only just wanted to watch that one video. Why am I getting all this other stuff? So it's definitely something we should be thinking about for sure.
I'm super excited to announce that this podcast just got the first ever sponsor. I just started the podcast out like 3 months ago, and now we have 21 Bitcoin as a partner for this podcast. 21 Bitcoin is Bitcoin only from day one, and they teach and preach self custody. This is my go to exchange when someone asks me, oh, where can I buy my Bitcoin from? This is the easiest entry for Bitcoiners. And if you want lower fees, plus at the same time support this podcast, use code Robin and click the link in the description. An interesting experiment is also going on the feed of, I don't know, your girlfriend, one of your friends, even that people that are really close to you, they sometimes have completely different
Yeah.
feeds already. And it's interesting to see just like the same app with the same interface, and the topics are completely different from of each other. Maybe going back to the rabbit hole, what do people usually find in those rabbit holes besides the best money ever? Like, what do you see as people are discovering in their rabbit hole stories and finding besides just Bitcoin itself? Like, I think that sometimes Bitcoiners having interesting phases of their life when they discover Bitcoin, and it's like this stick where they find a new way.
One of the common questions I ask is like, what was the thing that was the light bulb moment for you? What was it that sort of suddenly made you understand it, and that was the thing that kind of made you fall down this rabbit hole? And a lot of people struggle with that question, and often you get, do you know what? There wasn't that one, just that one thing. It was kind of this kind of wave that just kind of eventually hit them, and then they were down this rabbit hole. And it's hard for people to grasp. And even for me, for example, there wasn't actually one particular thing I was like, this is a light bulb moment, now I'm down a rabbit hole. It was a series of just little micro things, right? Of like, oh, that's interesting. Listen to this podcast, or listen to this, whatever it may be, or this audio book. And then you start sort of like putting these bits of the puzzle together. And it's almost like, I don't know if you ever saw it. Maybe I'm just showing my age here, and obviously it's, I'm over here in the UK. But there was this TV show called Catchphrase, and it was about sort of like these things that came up on the screen, and people used to then press the buzzer to give the catchphrase. And in between these sort of levels, they used to do this thing where they used to press the buzzer, and it used to reveal a little bit of an image. And then as this little bit of an image came up, they would see whether they can see what the catchphrase is behind this. And the more bits that were being removed, the more of the picture was being revealed, until they can actually see enough of it to understand what it was, that it was sort of being disguised, right? And I think that's the kind of thing that happens in the space. There's enough of the bullshit veil of legacy narratives that have slipped for you just to see enough behind it to realize there's something quite fascinating behind it. And I think that's when people then start to sort of remove the rest of it and start to dismantle it. So I think that's the common sort of overriding way that people then discover this fascinating thing called Bitcoin, and dedicate, or it incentivizes them to invest quite a lot of time in this space to sort of really truly put it to the test and check their understanding. And I went through a process of like, you know what, I must be wrong. This is too good to be true. And I think that is a moment for me where I was like, okay, now I need to sort of like really put it to the test. And that's how this whole questioning Bitcoin on Twitter thing evolved for me, because I wanted to put out questions into the community to see what came back. And I think that's how it sort of happened for me personally.
How did your like personal opinion change in the rabbit hole story? How was the Eon before Bitcoin completely different from right now?
I wouldn't say completely different. I think I just surrendered myself to what life was, and that was, just get up in the morning, go to work, was just work as hard as I can, get back, and just sort of like make sure that I'm not defaulting on anything, and I'm paying the bills, and just sort of like, come back to my house with my wife and kids, and just sort of live the normal average life. And I think I just sort of surrendered to that as my life, right? I was thinking about like what age will I going to be when I retire, how much could I potentially save, what will my retirement look like. So like just as an average human battery in this world, right? But I think what Bitcoin has done is just really enlightened my understanding of how the world actually operates, and the way it works, and what fiat money is, and what the global reserve currency means, and IMF and the WEF, and like all these things start to sort of like come up, and you're like, holy shit, this is actually a system that is designed to drain us as a resource for their benefit and gain. And Bitcoin is an opportunity. Bitcoin is hope, if you like. Bitcoin is an opportunity for us to really take back control of our own autonomy and our own sort of ideas and mindset. Because I think we as human beings have got such great potential that we have not previously had access to, and Bitcoin provides that opportunity. And that's why it's important for us to get that signal out there in ways that people can understand, and at least sort of be curious enough about it to give it a look, right? And hopefully there will be this point where enough people will see it enough to stand up against the system that sometimes just feels completely unstoppable at times. So yeah, that's what it's done for me. Really, it's given me the energy to really try and sort of put the signal out there in as best way as I can.
Yeah, it just came up in my mind. I sometimes see and hear people in real life, also on X, that kind of woke up to the whole system, to the fiat money system, to what the WEF is doing, what the IMF is doing, to stuff like that. And then they're saying at the same time, but Bitcoin is just a test object to that. It's like to trying to get the people into digital currencies, and it's just like an thing that comes before the actual thing. And it's interesting how people are waking up to some extent and not to all extents, and at the same time, like questioning yourself is like, or are they right or are we wrong? Like it is like you have to question yourself. But in general, I think Bitcoiners, I never met a group of people that is actually so curious about life, have about life sometimes so different approaches. Like I was at one Bitcoin meetup in Austria, in Graz, where I sat in front of two Bitcoiners, and the one was carnivore, like only eating meat, and the other one was vegan, raw vegan, only eating non-animal products. And it was such a lovely encounter because they were completely nice to each other, extremely
Mm, mm.
respectful, and they actually kind of come together and saw how many things they actually had in common, like fresh food is better than processed food and stuff like that. And so it's like Bitcoin as the unit of account, and now they are like on the same page, even though they are in such different connections. Like it's
Yeah,
interesting to see the Bitcoin community, how they question things, how they have different approaches, but we all come back to that one thing that's kind of called freedom and hope and like the prosperity of a new world.
I agree. And there's a Bitcoin meetup tonight here in London that I won't unfortunately be able to get to, but it's great going along. And yeah, you're right, seeing different people with different perspectives from all walks of life, from all different ages. And I think partly, and I don't know what it's like out where you are with your meetups, but with London, it's a fairly unique city in the sense that it's a melting pot of different sort of people from all races, religions, and all walks of life, and you start to see that now in the London Bitcoin meetup, right? There's so many different people there with so many different ideas and perspectives, and it's great going along to sort of hear that and understand and respect the fact that they've got different ideas and opinions, right? Because they all understand the promise of Bitcoin. And do you know what? Some people have different ideas about what Bitcoin is as well. And I find that fascinating because obviously, in my mind, I might have, an idea or a vision for Bitcoin, but that's also based on my own sort of upbringing, my mindset, and my own fantasies, right? And the way I see it sort of going in the future. And somebody, when they come with a different perspective, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. How did you even get to that in the first place? Where have you come from in order to get to that kind of idea? And that helps me sort of like navigate myself in my own rabbit hole in some way. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's been great.
that's an amazing point, and having like the questioning yourself. And in this, like I think to be a Bitcoiner you have to question a lot. Like you have to like there are obviously a lot of people that just came up because of the number go up technology, but they sticked around, and especially the guys that are now Bitcoin only, because the people that came into Bitcoin because of number go up and stuck with number go up, they are now all in crypto, they are in some
Mm,
shitcoin, they are doing trading with Bitcoin, they're doing all sorts of things because they are still hunting for fiat and not hunting for Bitcoin. So that's completely different for me, and that's also raises an interesting question. Where like we're having now more and more Bitcoin only podcasts. This is like an era where 2017, if you go back, there's not a lot of Bitcoin only content. There's even like the Reddit Bitcoin subreddit is taken over, not by the real Bitcoiners as we say it. It's like
right.
the BSV guys, and it's like how far are we in Bitcoin? Is still the stage where really big enemies could slow down the process of having Bitcoin adopted drastically? Is like, are there enemies out there that are big enough for Bitcoin still?
I think you often hear Bitcoin's inevitable And I believe, yes, it is. But I also need to remind myself that it's not necessarily inevitable in the way I see it to be. It's going to grow, it's going to expand, and it might evolve into something that we can't quite yet grasp or fully comprehend and understand, because Bitcoin has taught me, if you like, that everything I once knew is up for debate, right? I really need to think about what I've been taught as a child in school. Was there a motivation behind the narratives and the curriculum that I was taught as a kid? What has the news told me about the way the world is and who's the enemy in the world? And I think, if I go in there with that in mind, I also need to embrace the fact that there's going to be something happening that might not be what I fantasize it to be. And yeah, you've got things out there, different shit coins and stuff like that with huge budgets and marketing departments that, we're up against, if you like, because we don't actually have a marketing department because, they need to go into that. But I think there's always going to be a counter narrative, always, no matter what. Even if in a hyper Bitcoinized world, there are going to be counter narratives because people will still be motivated by their own agenda and their own ideas in the world, right? So I even think once we transition into that, which I think, one day we will, probably not in my lifetime, but I do feel that we are always going to be up against, other temptations and the direction of Bitcoin. So I think that's where we should sort of really embrace that idea of we actually don't even know what we're getting ourselves into in the future, but I hope a good thing.
Yeah, and I think Bitcoin embraces critical thinking, and that
Yeah,
alone is something that is so important for the individual level, but also the societal level. We are having
but
an Andrew. Yeah.
so one thing I would sort of try to get out there if I can, and if you can help me provide that as an opportunity to do that, is put a message to my fellow Bitcoiners, if you like, is sort of really sort of challenge yourself, challenge your own ideas of things, because I think sometimes, especially on X, I see people who seem to sort of attach Bitcoin to their pre-existing legacy ideas or
Mm.
mindset, or they haven't really they've discovered Bitcoin and then they're like, oh yeah, that fits and aligns with, because Bitcoin will align with anything you want it to. All roads lead back to Bitcoin, right? All narratives also lead back to Bitcoin. But if you stick to that same thing without exploring this fascinating warren that is the Bitcoin rabbit hole, then you're going to get stuck in this one place that I think ultimately will be your downfall. So I think, just by walking around exploring the different narratives and different perspectives is the only way that we can actually be critically minded in the space. And I think that's when we can really truly embrace and advance the adoption of Bitcoin. But sorry, I
And
interrupted
and
your
and
question.
that's a really hard thing to do.
Oh God,
Like, because you
mate,
always.
the ego, because you're up against your ego, right?
Yeah.
You're up against your own reality, and it's so easy. Trust me, I've done it in my past where I've actually sort of like in my peripheral, I know there's something else, but it's safer for me just to keep on this path, even though there might be another way. And but really, what Bitcoin actually does, it provides you the safety net and the strong foundation to actually, look around, because you can always fall back onto Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's very true. We're having an end routine, and that's an interesting thing. An end routine where the previous guest asked the question for the next guest. And the previous guest was Arsen from the relay team. You
Oh,
also had it.
Arsene. What's up,
and
Arsene? Yeah. Oh,
and,
what a
and
guy.
yeah, and
We
I,
had
I
him
made
on our show, so check him out on Rabbit Hole Stories. He's one of our very first guests.
Yeah, I actually, before I interviewed him, I actually looked at the interview from the Rabbit Hole Stories. Like, I interviewed him yesterday, and it was a fun talk. I
What's he
think
want to ask me? What's he want to ask me? Go on.
I made the terrible mistake that I revealed that you are my next guest.
Oh,
and and he wanted to ask you, how is it to be bold?
do you know what? I hope, Arsene, one day you'll find out for yourself, my friend. But looking at that beautiful head of hair he has, it's going to be highly unlikely. But
Uh,
mate, being bald is. Do you know what? Sometimes I wake up and I'm like, yeah, actually, it's all right. Then I see the light bouncing off my head sometimes, and I'm like, but yeah, all you can do really is embrace what you can't change, and that's all I can say, right? But what I you might see it now, but now you can start to see I have, it's maintenance. People think, oh, to be bald, it's all right. You don't have to worry about hairstyles and stuff like that. Yeah, it's true. But when you start to have a little bit of like 2 day growth, like I've got, then all your sort of patchy head will start to reveal itself. So you have to constantly shave it. It's proof of work. Trust me.
yeah, I had in the Corona time, I needed to cut my hair, and so
Right.
I cut it myself, and then it was so horrible that I decided to just cut my head completely, and it was going bald. It was interesting to wake up and just have the hair done,
Yeah.
but it was not.
But you know what?
Yeah,
I held on to my hair for far too long. It got to the point where I was trying to grow it out into little bits and sort of like hide it. And I just had to embrace the baldness and just go for it one day. It took a while to
perfect.
get used to.
Where can people find you? And there's also the podcast you have on YouTube on all the platforms, right?
Yeah, so on all our platforms, just type in Rabbit Hole Stories, and no doubt you'll find us. And for me personally on X, I'm at questioning BTC or questioning Bitcoin, and then you'll find me there. You'll see me popping up, just asking random questions that pop into my head now and again. Sometimes I don't get anything. Sometimes it blows up, but it's important, I think, just to constantly ask questions in this space because it's good to get that engagement.
It's very important to do that actually. Thank you for being on, and I hope I see you soon.
Pleasure. Take care.